जावेदानी.
When we look at today, out there in today's world, and we look at peace, we have to think of forgiveness. And people on both sides of every coin, we know, in universities especially, have protests on one side, protests on the other. And what fascinates me all the time is that things are happening overseas, but you're here in Canada, we're a nation. We should be, each the ones that are protesting are the same thing. We all want peace, but yet they're protesting against, back and forth. I've never really truly understood that. I understand what's happening in the Middle East, but here at home, it's harder for me to understand. I'm still learning about those things, but I do know that what we all search in our hearts is for this peace and love and joy that is brought to us through our Creator, through God's love for us. So this experience in residential schools was not an easy one for us. Those who colonized created the institutions and the systems that we now live with. So we have social service agencies, we have psychiatrists, we have psychologists, we have teachers, we have all these kinds of systems. We have governments that are provincial, governments that are federal. The provincial and the federal governments have their responsibilities. The federal governments are the crown. They're supposed to look after First Nations and the treaties we sign. The province has us First Nations living in the province. And when we're supposed to be looked after, they say, you feds pay for it. And the feds say, they live in a province, you pay for it. So that's what we experience. So nobody gets paid, looked after, and we wind up on the streets. Our people wind up on the streets as street people. And do you know that the people on the streets get judged? They get judged for living on those streets, a lot of them First Nation, and they've been through what I've just explained, intergenerational trauma. We all live with it, myself included, Tim. All of us live with intergenerational trauma. And it's passed down from what our ancestors that were in the residential schools, those survivors who were with us had. They passed that on. Some of our young are taught in their own homes, you useless, worthless piece of nothing. You're going to amount to zero. And they get beaten up in their own homes. Some of our young commit suicide. Not some, a lot of our young commit suicides. In fact, in the Northern Reserves, where Tim has done a lot of traveling to, it's an epidemic in some of those communities. Our young. Why? Because they don't know who they are. Their identity is not the same. If I ask one of you where your heritage is from, you could probably tell me about where you came from, who your grandma is, your grandpa, what customs were handed down to you, and traditions, and why you pray the way you do today. You can talk to them about all of that. But for those who have lost it for a long time and don't have it, and they're not given it at home except for being maybe abused or beaten up, what do you think? Then they leave there and they go to the cities. And they try to find their way in the cities. And in the city, we have, what's called the Child and Family Services. They also probably have it in the northern communities. Child and Family Services operated by province and funded by the provinces. And our young people leave their reserves, but they come into the cities. And when they get into the cities, there's a lot of temptation in cities. So they get connected to alcohol, addiction, drugs, you name it. And they end up in the justice system, they put in the nice fancy uniforms, and get to learn from the prisoners there, become a family. Why wouldn't they? Because they're sharing the same experiences in that institution. And some of those ones go back to the same institution because they know full well that there's people there who won't judge them, who know that many of these things, there's a reason why things happen to people. And we as a society do not understand that our First Nation peoples have been through traumatized. And those of us on our city streets should not be treated like people who are worthless or who don't have anything to offer. The people on our streets want what you want what I want to be with their families, want a life of love. And when they get into these nasty situations, crime is committed and they keep on a vicious circle. And so it is a very difficult thing for our people to come to grips with that. And one of the ways in which they do find some healing and transformation is to recover their sense of identity. Who really am I? So that brings me back to the question of who am I as a First Nation person? Well, a person of the land and the waters, a person who is connected to centuries worth of tradition on these lands and waters, a person who has been raised in faith in a specific way to follow our Creator in the person of Jesus in my life. And Jesus teaches me unconditional love, not to judge. Jesus himself did in our Holy Scripture had teachings about this, and he was harsh on his own institution, just like we are harsh on our institution that governs the Anglicans who are Indigenous. Jesus was hard on his institution, and he said that you need to learn. So there was a time in our stories where Jesus is brought. He's at a gathering, and people in his gathering bring to him a young woman caught in the very act of adultery. We know what that is, and the punishment for that is stoning someone to death. That was what the punishment is for that. Jesus bends down and writes in the ground. We don't know what he wrote. We're not told that. But he looks up at each of the elders and all those gathered, and he says to them, those of you around this circle who are without, what we say, sin, it says, but it's actually, what we call sin is simply a wrong understanding of God, and kind of getting off the path, if you will, and making a lot of mistakes. Those of you who here are without sin, make no mistake, you're pure and holy and perfect. Throw that first stone. Well, starting with the elders, one by one, they each left until there was nobody left. Jesus then looks at the young woman. He says, who around this table has condemned you? And she said, no, nobody. There's nobody here. So he says to her, neither do I condemn you. Go. And then he says to her, sin no more. Learn from what your experience has just happened. Don't do it again. It's not worth it. Learn from what your experience just taught you, and then you will grow more. And it's like growing up. We need to make mistakes before we can grow up, right? I mean, so maturity in faith is the same thing. We have to grow up in our faith the same way as we grow up when we're babies into the adulthood. In the Indigenous teaching, we have what's called a medicine wheel. It's and in the medicine wheel, chop it into 4 parts. In the medicine wheel, you have it teaches about the balance in our lives, and we were taught this by our elders. And then what it teaches us is that you're born into the world at 0, right? And at 0, you have to have somebody look after you. Your mom, your dad. Somebody has to take care of you when you're born into the world, or you'll die without that support. As you go around that circle of life, if you live long enough, like my mom lived to 91 and she wanted to be 100, but she lived to 91. If you live long enough in that circle, people like myself, her son, have to look after you. I did. As best I could, I looked after my mother until she died at 91. And I taught my sons the same way, so that on this medicine wheel, when you're on that medicine wheel, the ones that say are 12 years old, you look across to the other side of the medicine wheel, and there's a teaching for both sides in relationship with each other in this circle of life, but also in the relationship of family that we all carry. So that in that medicine wheel, we all have to look after each other as our relatives and family. So that's what we were taught, to look after each other. This was all broken down in the residential schools, the teachings of our ancestors, and so that's what's normal. And in this circle of life, to live a balanced life, you have to have 4 pieces of your life in balance. 4 is a very special number for us in our Indigenous lives. You have to have a balance of mentally, emotional, physical, and spiritual. You have to have that 4 pieces in balance in your life, or you're going to get into trouble. If you don't watch that, if one of those 4 areas are out of balance. And so it is important that we pay attention to those 4 parts of our lives: mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. And so in those 4 areas of life, if we can identify that, then we know on this circle of life, when you get around, certain age groups will help you. And we have traditional knowledge keepers like Tim and others who will give the information so our young can actually understand who they are as First Nation peoples and how they can become better people. So in the Anglican Church of Canada, given what the experience I just gave to you, back in 1988, it was the very first time many First Nations left their reserves. They traveled to a place called Fort Qu'Appelle in Saskatchewan. Fort Qu'Appelle. And in that gathering, it was all First Nations. The only non-First Nation was the primate. And the rest of them, it was the very first time they'd ever seen an Indigenous person wearing a collar. It was the very first time they had ever seen another Indigenous person from another tribe across Canada, because they weren't allowed to leave their reserves. It was illegal to leave your reserve. And what did they say in 1988? They told us clearly what was happening. There's drugs, there's violence, there's crime on our reserves, and we need help. We need help. Help us. And don't just listen to us. Help us. That's what they told us in 1988. Okay, the primate then of our Anglican Church of Canada, Michael Pierce, invited me to the next gathering in 1993. That one was held in Kenora at a place called Manaki Lodge. And when I first went into there, I felt very uncomfortable. I don't know if you ever went to that lodge, Tim, but it had these stuffed animals all over the lodge. Boy, that my heart just felt like it had been crushed. Yeah, do you take an auntie or an uncle and stuff them like that in your living room? I don't think so. That's what it felt like to me, to walk around that space and see all of these animals in a hunting lodge stuffed. So you could just look at how good a hunter I am. That bothered me. And I didn't know why at the time. I couldn't give it voice. It just felt, I got to get out of here. I can't really breathe. So I managed. But it was a gathering of people from coast to coast to coast. My good friend from Alberta, he came up and he actually said this to the microphones. He said, I didn't think I'd see a day like this come, where tribes from across Canada would all get together in the same room. And our tribes were not pure. They warred. A lot of these tribes that are coming together in this room, they warred in North America. The Cree and the Blackfoot, they were enemies. And the Cree and the Blackfoot have stories. The Blackfoot, my friend the Blackfoot, he was telling that we remember that how the people on the prairies, those Cree were so stupid. They would come up we had the mountains and the trees, and they'd come up and we'd just ambush them, because they didn't know anything about how to hunt. How to kill, do war with people and things of that nature. We just massacred them. But at the same time, they were in relationship and they did trade. They did do good things like that. It took time. But they learned how to work with each other as relatives as well. But they were not perfect before colonizers came. They did have struggle, but they had a very good way of understanding who they were and how they were supposed to treat people who were outsiders who came to their land.